my suggestion to you is to instead immediately dismissing that, looking at it a little bit critically and saying, what is it that they're finding in it? You don't have to end up liking it, but looking and saying, why is it that they enjoy it? And your answer should not be, because they are dumb and I am smart. Anytime you have a discussion on the internet, it seems like that is the fallback answer. Well, you don't like it because you are dumb and I am smart. This is how people argue these days. It's really bothersome to me. We laugh about it, but it is becoming increasingly common. It's becoming increasingly common in our political discourse. You think differently because either you are evil or you are dumb. And these are the ways that we approach our discussions. There is, when you start with you are wrong because you are evil or dumb, there's no middle ground conversation to go to from there. That is not a good starting point to having a rational discussion. So, we are science fiction and fantasy readers and writers. We are people who love this genre. Let's embrace our genre. Let's look at it and stop thinking of most of whatever everyone else is reading or most of what we're reading is crap and accept that what we like, we can like, and it's okay that we like it. And in fact, finding out why we like it and elevating our reasoning as high as whatever someone else is saying for the reason they like their fiction. I've spoken extensively about what I think science fiction and fantasy can do and why it is great and why it is a wonderful genre. But let's also not look at books that we read that we don't like and immediately have our fallback answer for why someone else might like it, that they are dumb or stupid, or the same thing, I suppose. And let's instead look at it and say, this is not to my taste. Why is this not to my taste? Can I have a discussion? Can I have a conversation, even with just myself, about why it is I don't like this? And certainly, if you don't recommend something to someone, it's okay to say, I didn't like this. But I would rather you be able to say, I didn't like this because X, Y, and Z, than to say to them, don't read it, it's crap. And that is my lecture for you. So, thank you. Very not good reasons. Just like I was willing to believe that everyone who sailed with Columbus was stupid, just because it was outside of my experience. So yeah. All right, let's go ahead and do Q&A. We've got 15 minutes. This is a 45-minute thing, I think, is how I'm supposed to do it. So let's just go up here.
I don't know if you run into this often in general conversation, but how do you respond to, say, a loved one saying your entire genre that you love is crap? Is there a way to...
Oh boy, that's hard. If you're a writer, make sure you have a good will and you don't leave the books to them. I joke about this, but that's what happened. Neil Gaiman blogged about that about what, a year and a half ago, that an author's family thought that. Boy, that is a tough one. I don't really run into that. I don't know why, because there's this whole, I belong to a religious community, right? I'm Mormon, I live in Utah, and so there's this whole, like the D&D thing, for instance. When I was a kid and I was playing D&D, there was the whole, my parents hearing that D&D is evil, and the friends saying, you let them do that? This is evil. And I'm lucky enough to have parents who are quite intellectual. My mother graduated first in her class in accounting, in a year when she was the only girl in her accounting class. And so, or her degree, her program. And so she picked up the books and read them and said, no, there's nothing wrong with this. They're interacting with their friends. That's great. You know how much trouble I've gotten to get my little nerdy sons to actually be with people? And there were even girls coming, and so she's like, this is awesome! D&D saved my son! So yeah, I haven't had to deal with that, so I don't know what you would say. Maybe the best thing to do is if they're hopefully rational people who have these beliefs, because sometimes, you know what, people can be very rational, intelligent people and disagree with you, and that's okay. But if they are, find something in the genre that you think they would really like. and say, I will read, an essay that you have, or I will do, something that you want me to do that will maybe cure me of my science fiction and fantasy addiction. And you can read this thing. And, if it's someone who's approaching from an intellectual standpoint, because sometimes they do, and say, well, this is crap. If you can give them some Gene Wolfe, or some Chip Delaney, or some Ursula Le Guin, that is really deep, thought-provoking, powerful stuff. Or if they're coming from a religious background and saying this, giving them C.S. Lewis and some of these things. I mean, science fiction and fantasy is wonderful specifically because it is incredibly broad as a genre. In fact, we use the word genre quite loosely. Genre means different things depending on what you're talking about or who you're talking to. But the Western genre, for instance, one of the reasons that it crashed and burned, and all the Western writers, they still write them, they just moved to historical. And the Western writers I've talked to actually love being in historical because the Western genre came to mean one specific type of story, rather than something that takes place in the West. And when they were able to actually jump ship and go to historical, they could write all sorts of great and wonderful fiction set in what would be a Western atmosphere without having to write that same story. And people outside of our genres often assume that we are a genre like the Western genre used to be, that there is one story. Science fiction and fantasy is not like that. Science fiction and fantasy is incredibly broad. And in fact, I like to say one of the reasons I love science fiction and fantasy is you can do anything in these genres that you could do in another genre, plus you can have dragons. Really, I mean, if you read who wrote it, the man who painted the Dragon George, what's his name? Shepard? Lucius Shepard. If you read that story, it's a beautiful magic realism story about a dragon that someone actually paints, the actual dragon on the scales. And it's just gorgeous piece of writing that is completely different, that you can then go and read Temeraire and have fun naval battles with dragons. And it's essentially Patrick O'Brien with dragons. You can read Anne McCaffrey, which is far future, Lost Colony with dragons. I mean, really, you can do anything. You can find, Melanie Ron, romance plus dragons. I mean, you can find anything in this genre. So why wouldn't we be writing science fiction fantasy? Because we can do anything we want and do it as well as anyone in any other genre and have dragons. So that would be my answer. I don't know if that will help, but if they are willing to talk with you and you can do a trade-off, if you can find the right book, you can change their mind entirely with the right book. All right, other questions right here.
You just brought up religious context, and
yes.
Wheel of Time related question. One of the things in Wheel of Time is that there's no concept of worshiping the creator. There's just acknowledging, and it's just a very deist sort of religious society. And just your personal thoughts on it. As
being there is spirituality and no religion. What's the other part of your question? Just I've always found the Wheel of Time fascinating for that very reason. Robert Jordan worked very hard to make a colorblind and religion-blind society. In fact, it has been how many rereads, and I'm still realizing for the first time that certain characters are of certain ethnicities, because the characters in the books don't pay any attention. They'll say that someone has darker skin, but that's all they'll say of it. And that's very fascinating. He also made a world where religion, there is no religion. His answer to that was, the reason is because magic is present, and the idea of the Dark One is actually very present in their lives, and so they don't need religion because it's real to them.
Yeah, there's no idea of faith at all in the entire book.
There's no idea of faith because it's very real to them. And it's interesting to me because he didn't do that with gender roles. Gender roles, he made a big issue in the book. It's something he wanted to deal with, whereas religion and racial tension is something he didn't. And so it's very interesting to me from a lot of different aspects. I think one of the most fascinating things about the books is the way that he deals with mythology. If you haven't read The Wheel of Time, the concept is that the legends and mythology we now have in our world, the idea is that this world, this founded them. And now we're still talking about these people, but they become myths and legends to us. And yet during their time, the things that happen in our time are their myths and legends. They tell myths and stories about what's his name, Buzz Aldrin flying to the moon in the belly of an eagle. You know, they have a name for him there. Our world is a mythology. America and Russia in the Cold War has become a story of two giants who used to fight with lances of light, and things like this. And so the idea is that it's flopping mythology on its head. And so much like Tolkien stayed away from religion and dealt with mythology, I think Robert Jordan wanted to deal with mythology, and you find all mythologies mixed up and jumbled together in there, where, you know, the idea being that they started these mythologies, these people did. And so what are my thoughts on it? I'm fascinated by it. I don't know if I have any thoughts other than this is really interesting. I like what's going on here because it really has you kind of look at religion, mythology, and spirituality in different lights, which I think is one of the great things that fiction can do. And so I enjoy it, but I don't know that I have, you know, I might be able to turn on my scholarly hat and write you an essay about it, but then, you know, the parabola of boringness is going to take off, so I'm just going to leave it there. Right?